the House, we know it is businessmen and businesswomen across Britain who create wealth and growth. Success is the result of hard work, taking risks, satisfying your customer, employing your neighbour. The government should provide the environment for those businesses to thrive, rather than threatening every part of the economy with higher taxes.
Yeah. What you're about to see is a masterclass in political oratory. Watch the language of the Conservative MP. He doesn't rely on personal attacks. He uses facts. He uses numbers.
The Chancellor is clearly desperate to raise more money. It is a cruel irony, is it not, that having invented a £22 billion black hole to justify her taxing and spending, the Chancellor now finds herself facing a black hole entirely of her own making.
And that's what makes it so devastating. Notice the reaction from the other side, the stunned faces, the inability to respond with anything of substance. Pay close attention to the moment he says, what Labour does best, spending other people's money. That's when reality lands the hardest.
Labour will use all the business acumen that the Cabinet has at its disposal to create a modern version of British Leyland. It's what Labour does best, spending other people's money.
Keep your eyes peeled and get ready for one of the sharpest takedowns you'll ever see in Parliament. Before you watch this epic demolition, hit like and subscribe to the channel to make sure these truths reach more people, because the mainstream media would rather this stayed hidden.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This government was elected on a manifesto to increase spending by £9.5 billion. This was to be paid for by £7.3 billion of extra taxes and £3.5 billion of extra borrowing, all set out in the Labour manifesto. It was a modest plan with a prudent margin. Exactly the sort of plan you might expect a party in opposition to put forward to show they could be trusted to run the public finances. Members opposite might reflect that had they implemented that plan, the British economy would be in better condition than at present. Because in Labour's first budget, they increased public expenditure not by £9.5 billion, but by £70 billion. How the Labour benches cheered with delight at the thought of all this extra spending. Pay rises for train drivers with no conditions. Pay rises for junior doctors with no strings. Money for Great British Energy. More money for the British Business Bank. All so the government can invest in projects the private sector doesn't think will make a return. We all know how this story ends. Labour will use all the business acumen that the Cabinet has at its disposal to create a modern version of British Leyland. It's what Labour does best, spending other people's money and borrowing yet more money that other people's children can repay. But all this extra spending and borrowing comes at a price. And the government is now paying 5.7% interest to borrow money for 30 years. That is the highest level since 1998. And this surge in borrowing costs reflects the market's lack of confidence in the Chancellor's ability to manage Britain's finances. I will give way.
Does he accept that that surge in borrowing costs started actually with Liz Truss's mini budget and has not really stopped there since trajectory started?
At all. No. This surge is entirely due to the Chancellor losing control of public expenditure.
£70 billion.
Something shifted in the Commons this week, and it wasn't just another loud exchange across the chamber. It was a calculated accusation that the government has lost control of Britain's finances and that ordinary families may soon pay the price. When markets stop believing a chancellor, things move quickly and rarely in the public's favour. In a sharply delivered intervention, Conservative MP Ashley Fox launched a detailed attack on the government's economic direction. His argument was straightforward but politically potent. Labour entered office promising relatively modest spending increases, carefully balanced with specific tax rises and borrowing. But according to him, that restraint has vanished. Public expenditure has expanded far beyond initial expectations, and the consequences are now being felt in the bond markets. He highlighted rising long-term borrowing costs, noting that 3 zero-year gilt yields are at levels not seen since the late 1990s. In plain terms, it's becoming more expensive for Britain to borrow. And when government borrowing costs rise, those pressures ripple outward, affecting mortgages, business loans, and ultimately jobs. Labour MPs push back, with some pointing to the aftershocks of Liz Truss's mini-budget as the original source of market instability. But the deeper issue raised wasn't just about past crises, it was about present credibility. This debate matters far beyond Westminster. If investors suspect fiscal discipline is slipping, they demand higher returns to lend. That translates into higher interest rates across the economy. For homeowners, that can mean increased monthly payments. For businesses, it means delayed investment decisions. When firms hesitate because they fear future tax rises or policy unpredictability, growth slows. And when growth slows, wages stagnate and unemployment risks rising. What sounds like a technical argument about borrowing costs quickly becomes a kitchen table issue. Politically, this speech was no accident. After years of criticism over economic turbulence, especially during the brief premiership of Liz Truss, Conservatives are trying to reclaim the image of fiscal discipline. The strategy is clear. Frame Labour as instinctively high spending, portray internal Labour rebellions as evidence of weak leadership, and suggest that markets have already delivered their verdict. Phrases like black hole and spending other people's money are designed not just to criticise policy, but to tap into deeper voter anxieties about waste and rising taxes. Labour, however, faces its own strategic calculation. The government's defence rests on the argument that investment now in infrastructure, public services, and long-term projects is necessary to drive future growth. They argue that careful borrowing to fund productivity-enhancing policies is responsible, not reckless. This is the classic ideological divide in British politics: cautious state restraint versus proactive state intervention. Looking ahead, the pressure is mounting. If borrowing costs remain elevated, the Chancellor faces difficult choices: cutting spending risks angering her own MPs and fracturing party unity. Raising taxes hands ammunition to the opposition. Borrowing more could deepen market unease. None of these options are politically comfortable, especially if economic growth underperforms. The next fiscal statement will therefore be about more than numbers. It will be about restoring confidence among investors, businesses, and voters. Once a perception takes hold that a government has lost control of the public finances, reversing that narrative is incredibly difficult. What happened in the Commons was more than a heated exchange. It was the opening move in a larger battle over economic trust. And ultimately, the final judgment won't be delivered in Parliament. It will come from financial markets and from the British public themselves.